we seen game one and how Dallas was able to edge that game out. What are you expecting the adjustments to be for the Timberwolves in game two? And what did you see in game one that can carry over? And, from the Timberwolves perspective, what is your take on, that game one and how can they bounce back in game two?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great game. I thought very competitive. At times, I thought both teams had a realistic chance to win the game, but the Mavericks were just a better team in my opinion for more of the night, and they really earned that win. 108 to 105 on the road in Minnesota. That's a huge win. I thought the Timberwolves kind of played harder to start the game, and they shot the lights out in the first half. But then once Minnesota, or I'm sorry, once Dallas start kind of met the intensity level of Minnesota is when they
Mm.
really got back into the game. Early on they were finding success in the pick and roll, whether it was Kyrie Irving or Luka Doncic. They were getting, taking advantage of the drop coverage, but they weren't really playing that hard. Minnesota was beating them to a lot of offensive rebounds, getting loose balls, 50-50 balls, and then Minnesota was shooting the lights out early on. But in late first half and into the second half, I thought Dallas really picked it up intensity wise. They started contesting perimeter shots more. They started getting to those loose balls a little bit more, and then they continued to find that success against that drop coverage, and that's where they really took advantage down the stretch. I mean, Kyrie Irving, we talked about him last week where he didn't really seem to have the aggression that we were looking for in that Thunder series. He comes out last night, 24 first half points. He really set the tone for
Set
Dallas.
the tone.
Yeah, and then Luka Doncic late in the game, he took over down the stretch, 15 points in the fourth quarter. When you have both of those guys clicking on those cylinders, they combine for 63 points. That's really hard to stop. And I think there is a way for Minnesota to obviously get back into the series. It's only one game. We're not going to overreact. A lot of times, game one is just each team kind of feeling each other out. They're going to adjust, but I do think we saw something with Dallas where they have a formula and that's going in the pick and roll, putting Rudy Gobert in that drop coverage, putting Karl Anthony Towns in the drop coverage. They're not going to be able to continue to do that all series long, or Dallas will
Yeah,
make. I feel like they will make pretty quick work of them.
gotcha. I have so many takeaways just from this game alone.
Yeah,
For one, I'm gonna go to Dallas first. Is that Kyrie came out to set the tone. He's the only individual on this team that had the championship. So I feel like he took upon himself to be that leader to show, hey, we're in this situation where we've been in a conference finals. Luca has been there before, but hey, I'm the only guy that's ever finished that chapter, that story of this book that we're telling. And actually go on to win a championship on that level. I think he came out being very aggressive. I know we talked about him previous podcast of how he wasn't that aggressive and it kind of showed and it kind of stifled the team to some degree. Luca, if he's aggressive in a manner of which he was the other night, this is going to be a hard series for the Timberwolves to win. He is the key component, and obviously he's the best player on that team. But he is the key individual in this series because if he's playing off, he's playing a bad game. If he's having a bad situation where he's not being aggressive, he's not shooting really efficient from three, or he's not really shooting efficient from the field. Um, this could be a series that could go either way. But if he's being really effective, he's being aggressive, this could be quick work, and it could potentially end rather than we quicker than we rather anticipated it to end. From the Timberwolves' perspective, this is a series, and I will say it again. This is a series that Rudy Gobert should not be playing in. I don't think he's needed to play in this series. I think you made an amazing point when you said they put him in drop coverage and they just picked the Timberwolves to pieces because he cannot guard in that coverage. It makes it extremely difficult for a big man that really can't really move his legs to be able to guard smaller guards in this type of system that Dallas is trying to run. Karl Anthony Towns, he's more light-footed. He's more bigger on the backside, so he could handle that type of pressure that Dallas will put on them and from the offensive standpoint. But also he did struggle in this pick and roll aspect as well. When they're pushing him down into the paint, he did struggle as well. So between the two, obviously Cat is more of a threat from the 3-point line. He's more of a threat overall on the court. Rudy Gobert is really notorious for the lobs and open contested jumpers that he had that was amazing that it went in the last series. That was baffling that the whole team stood up and gave him a round of applause that actually went in. Because when the last time you seen Rudy Gobert shoot a fadeaway and it went in? Like crazy work. But I think from the standpoint of from Karl Anthony Towns is that he needs to be more aggressive. There's not a matchup that he should not win against the Dallas Mavericks. There's not a single matchup that he should not win against the Dallas Mavericks because he has a size advantage. He can shoot the three. He can go into the paint. They don't have anybody for him. And you can look at that a good thing, a bad thing when it comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves because they're still playing two big men. And so when you're putting Karl Anthony Towns in that situation and you're putting Gobert also on a low block and he's clogging up the paint, it makes it really hard for them to defend the Dallas Mavericks who want to shoot threes. And it's amazing that they won a game not shooting a lot of threes.
Mhm.
And so from the standpoint of Minnesota, Anthony Edwards has to learn how to play within the double team. You're the best player on this team. They're going to send doubles. You have to learn how to play outside of that double team. You need to learn how to make the right play. You need to learn when to pass the ball and when not to. You need to learn when to be aggressive and when not to. Because I've seen too many times in the previous series that he make the wrong pass and wrong play out of the double team. And so that cannot transition into this series where he's making the wrong play and a wrong pass out of the double team. So Anthony Edwards, I know he hasn't been here before. He's young. He's the next face of this league, in my opinion. I think he needs to learn how to play in this pressurized situation when it comes to the double team because they're going to continue to send that double team, and he's going to have to figure out how to play out of it.
Yeah, I'll go off of your point about Ant, and then I also want to go back to the thing you said about Rudy. But I
Mm.
agree with you with Edwards. I mean, I think part of it was Dallas's defense, but also he just didn't seem to have the aggressiveness that we're used to either. I don't know if it's the fact that it's his first conference finals game, or probably more likely, he mentioned it in the post-game press conference that, him and the team are likely just tired. I mean, they're coming off a
You
grueling.
can't use that in the NBA.
No, you
You
can't.
can't say,
But sometimes I'm not saying, that's a great excuse to use, but that doesn't mean
mm,
it's not true. I mean, you're coming off a
that's
seven
not true. Yeah.
year, and nobody on this team has ever played this deep into the playoffs. I mean, Mike Conley is the only guy that's been in the conference finals and he got swept, and that was 10 years ago. None of these guys that are out here, and he didn't play well either last night. So, I mean,
Mm.
I think that that is a legit reason, but you can't use that throughout a whole series. That might be a reason for game one, but that's not going to work if you say that after game two. So you got to come
You
out.
can feel it. You can't say it.
Yeah.
It's a difference. You can feel tired, and individuals, commentary, analysts, they might comment on, what, they just look tired out here. They just came off a grueling 7 game series, used to reigning defending champions, and now they're, less than 24 hours. They only had one day off. Less than 48 hours later, now you're into another Western Conference, so you're into another series, and time a trip to the NBA Finals is on the line. You cannot, if you're the Timberwolves, if you're Ant Man, if you're Karl Anthony Towns, you cannot say this team is tired. You can feel it. Everybody can see it. You cannot say the reason that you lost is because this team was tired.
Yeah, I think we could all see that he was, because he wasn't getting downhill as often as we're
Mm.
normal as we're used to seeing him. I mean, he shot 12 3-point attempts. He actually shot well from deep. I think he was 5 from 12. But he just wasn't, attacking off the dribble as often as we normally see from him. And there were times in the game where it looked like he had a step, either it was Derrick Jones or another defender on him, and then instead of continuing downhill and attacking Gafford or Lively at the rim, he would pull it out. At first, I saw him do it a couple times, and I was like, maybe it's because Dallas has a legitimate rim protector. Last year, when they got into the paint, it was Jokic there, and anybody, most of the guys on the Timberwolves can go up and finish around him. It's a different story when you're going against a guy like Lively and Gafford. But then, as later in the game, it started to seem like he just didn't have his legs under him. A couple of the jump shots came up short. A couple of times, it looked like he wanted to get downhill, but maybe he just didn't have it in him. And I don't know what the reason is for that, but that's going to have to change if the Timberwolves want to win game two. They're not going to be able to have him score him and Cat combined for 35 points. They're going to need those guys to be putting up 50 and 60 points, similar to what Kyrie and Luca did last night.
Yeah. Those two are gonna have to match him. Because those two are gonna have to match Kyrie and Luca on the offensive standpoint, and then they're gonna have to be primary defenders potentially on those guys. And I know Carl Anthony Towns, he's a little bigger, but we might see situations where he's guarding someone like Luca.
Well, and I think that's a great point is another factor in why Edwards was likely exhausted is because he's chasing around Kyrie Irving. I mean,
Yeah.
that was his matchup from the jump, and
Yep.
McDaniels got switched on him at times as well. But Edwards was definitely the guy that was on him most of the night, and Kyrie was doing, whatever he wanted, especially throughout that first half. That's going to take a toll on your legs as well, and that's going to affect you when you're trying to score on the other end. So I think that's a thing that we're going to have to watch throughout this series is Edwards going to be able to get to the rim and finish? And then on the other end, like we already mentioned, can the Timberwolves at least limit somewhat in that drop coverage? I disagree with you that I don't think Rudy Gobert. I think he can play in this series. I just don't think you can play him in drop coverage. I think even though it's not his strong suit, I think you have to
Mhm.
start blitzing that pick and roll. I mean, if you double Luca at the top of the key and he's forced to throw it to the roller, then you're making Lively or Gafford or Derek Jones, you're making them a decision maker. And yeah, even though they got a 4-on-3 where you got two guys behind you, I mean, at least it's not Luca making that decision. At least, we saw Lively. They did it once late in the game. Gobert blitzed the pick and roll. Luca hit Lively and Lively traveled. He's not someone that's used to making that decision. You're probably going to give up some wide open looks in the three, from three in the corner, but at least it's not Luca getting downhill, getting into the middle lane because they've already proven that they can't stop that. I mean, most teams can't.
One of my biggest pet peeves in the NBA, and where I saw this so many times in this first game, is that teams that willingly switch on weaker matchups. And for individuals that don't understand what I'm saying, is that most of the times, and when you're on the offensive end, if you have the ball, you're searching for the weakest matchup basically you were searching for the weakest defender on the court. That's not always the case because sometimes they're all good defenders, but you're searching for the best possible matchup for you. My biggest pet peeve is when the opposing defensive team allows the switch. I've seen this so many times in game one that Luca calls for the switch and the Timberwolves willingly let the switch happen. Instead of fighting over the screen, they let the switch happen. It is one of the biggest pet peeves of mine. Why would you let Luca have the matchup he wants? That I don't understand that. I don't understand that at all. And so, from the standpoint of this series, again, Luca's going to be the main individual that I'm looking at. If he's on, this series could be over rather fast. If he's inefficient and is not aggressive, the Timberwolves can draw the series out as long as it goes. And so I think we both had the Timberwolves winning this series. I'm not going to overreact over one game, but what I'm saying is from the standpoint of Rudy Gobert, I understand that he could play in this series, but again, it goes back to the defense that they're running. If they continue to let that drop coverage happen, they're going to cook him every single time. The Timberwolves need to make an adjustment. And if they don't, they're gonna get cooked tomorrow. And so that's the key. Sometimes it boggles our mind how people the coaches, and not just the coaches, the players, they let they let what the opposing team want happen. And so you can't do that when you're trying to win and when you're trying to go for a championship and compete for a title.
Yeah, you're definitely right that the Timberwolves need to make adjustments, and I think they will. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
one of the best teams in the league and the top-rated defense. So, Chris Finch said today that it was a really tough film session that they had. I think they probably looked it over and saw a ton of mistakes that they made. And even though they only lost by three, and they were up what four with about 2.5 minutes to go. So I mean, they were in legitimate position to win this game. But you look over that tape and you probably see a lot of mistakes that you made that you can clean up. And I think they'll probably adjust. And then if Dallas needs something that they need to adjust to going back home in game 3, I think they'll do that as well because I think these are two of the best teams in the league. And this is probably a series that is going to continue to go back and forth. I will say that Dallas obviously has the upper hand, not only with the 1-0 series lead, but like we've talked about, they showed that they have a formula to find success. So now the ball is in the Timberwolves court. Can they make these adjustments ahead of game 2 and at least tie it up going back to Dallas? Because you obviously don't want to be in an 0-2 hole going to game 3. You mentioned it coming into the series. I had Timberwolves in 7. I thought it was a series that could very realistically go either way. But I did say Minnesota in 7. Now, after winning game 1, Dallas, I think at the very least it's got to be a toss-up. Coming in, I thought it could go either way, but now it's hard to say that you don't see Dallas, potentially winning this series when they put Minnesota in position where they now have to win 4 of the next 6. Where are you at
for the
going?
next season. I'm in that same situation where I do think it's a toss up. We both had Timberwolves in 7. I thought it was one of the most entertaining competitive series that I think we will have. It is still one game, but I do consider it a toss up now. Um, there's a great chance that Dallas can win this series and go to the finals. I will say there's an amazing chance that it can happen. I will say there's a good chance the Timberwolves could still win this series. Um, Again, game 3 will tell me a lot. Where the series is going back to Dallas after they play the game in Dallas, depending on where this series is when that time comes, will tell me who wins this series. I believe game 3 will determine who wins this series. And so I think from the standpoint of Minnesota coming back and winning game 2, I don't ever want to say that anything's a must win other than when you're on the brink of it, but this is a must win for the Timberwolves. You do not want to go to Dallas down 2-0. And so from the standpoint of that, I do believe the Timberwolves win game 2. And then where do we go from there? We're going to find out.